Good afternoon, and thank you all for standing by. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. After the presentation, we will conduct a question-and-answer session. To ask a question, you'll be asked to press *1 and record your name. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I'll now turn the call over to Ms. Michelle Carnes. You may proceed.
Thank you, Lou. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Carnes at SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Welcome to our webinar today on Trevor CARE, and welcome back if you came last week to the Trevor Ally webinar. We're going to have our same speakers this time as we had last time. Nathan and Morgan are going to talk to you about another option with the Trevor Project that's available to projects across the country, and some of our grantees are indeed using some of these tools. So those of you who do suicide prevention with LGBT youth, this is going to sound familiar, and you're going to be excited to hear about what we have to offer with this program. And we will have Q&A at the end, so we're excited to chat with you directly. So at this time, I'll let you know that Nathan's going to be our main speaker, and we'll have some time to chat afterwards. So Nathan, whenever you are ready.
Thank you so much, Michelle. As Michelle said, my name is Nathan Bellew. I'm the Education Director at the Trevor Project. And thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. I'm really excited about this presentation and the content that we'll be sharing with you. Just a little bit about myself. I've been with the Trevor Project about 3 years, and prior to coming to the Trevor Project, I worked in student health at a university in North Carolina. That university actually had a Garrett Lee Smith grant, and my work there focused on working with LGBTQ students and staff and faculty in higher education. And then since coming to the Trevor Project, I've been working in all of our education and outreach externally in our upstream prevention approaches. So that's a little bit about me, and I'd like to introduce as well Morgan Keenan, who's our regional coordinator in Missouri, the eastern part of Missouri. Morgan?
Hi, yeah, thanks so much for having me. And like Nathan said, I work in Missouri doing the Trevor CARE presentation that you're going to learn a little bit more about today. And I'm really excited to talk about it with you all out in other states. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for joining, Morgan. So to get started, here's an outline of what we plan to talk about today. Some of this content will look a little bit familiar if you were with us last week, but I want to make sure that folks who maybe were not will hear some of the same content around LGBTQ education and suicide prevention, and how we work to pair those effectively, how we make sure that our suicide prevention education is incorporating information about LGBTQ populations in an effective way. So we'll talk about that to get started. And then the rest of the training will really be to talk about the Trevor CARE Training, which is our training that is a suicide prevention gatekeeper and awareness training. So I'll expose you to what that training is at its core, and I'll also talk about the various ways that we provide adaptations of that training and the various modules that we use. I'll also talk about the services that the Trevor Project offers in general, especially our education programs and our campaigns, our awareness campaigns, so that if you are not aware of those or were not on the webinar last week and did not hear about those, you walk away understanding the full array of things that are available to you if you're seeking to provide resources to LGBT youth. And then towards the end of the call, we'll ask Morgan to talk about how he has been working as part of the Garrett Lee Smith grant in the state of Missouri to use the Trevor CARE Training. So this is something that is effectively being done on the ground. Missouri is not the only place. We're also partners in the New York State grant, and then a grant that's just getting started in the state of California. And we've collaborated with many others, those three in a very, very formal way. So we'll talk about how this is being done there so you can kind of hear from someone actually on the ground in that context. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end as well. I'm very excited to be able to share this content with you. So first of all, the conversation of LGBTQ education and competency as it relates to suicide prevention. Many of you may perhaps have LGBTQ youth populations built into your grants as a component, as a population that you work with. And so this is something that you're keenly aware of, the need to make sure that you're providing resources that are specifically addressing the needs of this population. Even if perhaps that's not something that you have written into your grant, all of us no doubt have an awareness that LGBTQ youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. And the rates are actually higher or lower depending on what part of the community someone does belong to. With that being the case, it's really important that if we're going to be doing suicide prevention for LGBTQ youth and with LGBTQ youth, that we're using tools that are in fact effective. And so, you know, sometimes we might say, okay, I'm going to do this. Well, what's out there and what can I use? And we might do a Google search. We might go on YouTube to find videos. Sometimes some of those things might be great, and sometimes there really may be no evaluation to tell us whether or not using those tools around LGBT issues would be effective or not effective. So really to frame this conversation, you know, we want to say that it really is important to use tools and ways of talking about this that have been found to be effective. And this training, which we're going to expose you to today, we've been doing now for about 3 years, and we evaluate it consistently, and we found it to be a very effective tool in reaching the learning objective of helping people to understand why LGBTQ youth are at higher risk for suicide, and their unique risk factors and protective factors, and then how that affects programs that you create and systems that you are a part of, and how you should tailor those to meet the needs of LGBTQ young people. I think it is important to know that there are, in fact, programs that are in the best practice registry for suicide prevention around LGBTQ topics. So SPRC has a kit with training, which is in the best practice registry. There are also 2 trainings for adults, which actually I'll be talking about later, that are online interactives from Cognito Interactive, and those are, in fact, also in the best practice registry for suicide prevention. So we don't have to completely recreate the wheel when we're going to do this type of work. And then lastly, I would say that there are 2 different types of trainings that the Trevor Project uses when we're trying to meet this objective of making sure that adults who work with youth are competent in the area of LGBTQ youth. And so last week we talked about Trevor Ally Training, and that webinar and that training will actually be available later online. Michelle can tell you about that at the end of this webinar. And that's really a baseline LGBTQ competency curriculum. Trevor CARE, which we're going to talk about today, as I said, is really kind of step 2 in that conversation. And it's assuming a baseline level of knowledge about LGBTQ youth and really having a more mental health specific conversation. One last thing before I talk about Trevor CARE and I go into a demonstration really of what that is, which is that this program is for adults, it's not for youth. And I will talk later about the programs that the Trevor Project has, the curriculum that we have that is designed for youth. I think it's really important, and most of us know this, of course, that we don't do suicide prevention with a group of young people in the same way you would do it with a group of adults. It's a very different animal. And so this training I'm going to show you today, you wouldn't, for instance, take this training and make adaptations to it and use it in a room full of young people. That really wouldn't make sense. We do have trainings that are especially designed for young people. And so as we're looking at this training today, just keep that in the back of your mind if you're thinking about how to actually work with young people themselves. This training is for the providers who work with youth. So the Trevor CARE training. So this is kind of the beginning of this demonstration I'll do with you of what this training is. And I'm not going to walk through everything in this training. Many of these things are things that you already know, things that you're already exposed to. What I will be presenting is this is our model of having this conversation. And then at the end, we'll talk about ways that you can gain access to this curriculum, ways that you could potentially modify this curriculum to make sense for you. So the title is CARE, which stands for Connect, Accept, Respond, Empower, How to Support LGBTQ Youth. So this is a basic outline of what we do when we're having this conversation. We talk about why our organization exists, who we are, and why we do the work we do. And that's really where we have a conversation about why LGBTQ youth are at higher risk for suicide. And you'll see that as we progress in the presentation. We have a conversation around risk factors, what they are, first of all, and then an outline specifically for youth. What are the risk factors for youth? And we tailor that conversation to what are the additional risk factors that we're aware of for queer young people. We talk about the warning signs, and we talk about how to help. So this really is a gatekeeper training at its very core. And then we talk about the whole host of the Trevor Project's programs, some of which are, of course, actually crisis intervention services, and some of which are more prevention programs. And then, of course, we always have an opportunity for questions and answers. So that's a basic outline of what we try to accomplish. Here is how we might change that up. So realizing that audiences can be very different. There are different modules that we do have, and I wanted to expose you to this information because we aren't going to be reviewing these modules today, but I want to let you know that they exist and that we do use them. So if a group asks us to come in and have a conversation around LGBTQ youth and their risk of suicide, but they opt out of having the Trevor Ally Training, for instance, because that would be a whole day worth of training, we want to make sure that there's some baseline level of competency around LGBTQ youth. So we'll insert a module that's just about LGBT identities that will be a crash course, essentially, prior to doing Trevor CARE Training. We also sometimes have a conversation around barriers to help seeking. We have that module we include, which helps folks to understand why young people might have a hard time reaching out and asking for help and what the research says about that, which is very helpful for many providers. Then we have modules that are specific to environment, so for higher education, for K through 12 schools, and for health professionals. And it tailors the LGBT content to those specific populations and the barriers they might face and also the resources that they have. Other adaptations could include shortening the training, which many times we end up doing in some settings because we don't have time to go through all of this content, but folks want to walk away understanding why this population is at high risk for suicide. So we might shorten the training and really make it an awareness training so that they walk out more aware of why LGBTQ youth are at higher risk for suicide. That means that the gatekeeper part of the training might be taken out, so they wouldn't walk away understanding what the warning signs are and how to respond, but they will walk away with an increased understanding. The second adaptation we might make is we might lengthen it. So we might lengthen it so that we have more time to really make sure that folks really understand how to talk to someone who is thinking about suicide and the right way to connect them to resources. One additional thought as we get started is to say that this training is most definitely a suicide prevention gatekeeper training. Through the California grant, we will be working with folks from SPRC to think about how to provide this type of content for trainings that are a little more advanced, such as the MSAR training and other trainings, which some of you may use, which are designed for mental health professionals, to make sure that they have LGBT content as part of those types of trainings as well. So while that's not something specifically, this training is not designed really for people who are already in that place. Many times we do give this training to mental health professionals, but that's a tool that will be coming soon. So just something to think about if you provide that type of education as well. So we start by talking about who we are, and the Trevor Project is the leading national organization that provides crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning youth. And just so all of you on the phone know, we use the term youth very broadly to mean youth 24 and below. So it's a very broad youth definition, as many of you no doubt use as well. So if I were doing the training, this would be a time when I would spend some time to explain who these various populations are. And the module that I spoke about to make sure that people had at least that baseline level of competency would go right after this slide. So we would make sure that they have some awareness about what all those words mean. So this section is really very important, which is to talk about why there's an organization like the Trevor Project and specifically research about LGBTQ youth. So we share statistics about suicide in general. For many folks, they may have never been to a suicide prevention training before. So some of these statistics are ones no doubt you use. We know that first statistic that it varies within that population as to the rate of it being a cause of death. But then we talk about lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth, and that from what data we have, we feel confident saying they're 3 to 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. We also share this information, which is really the best research or best data we have about trans folks. This is not a youth-specific study, but it does help us to get an idea and a feeling for what's going on in the transgender community. And this was a study published by, or the survey results published by the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. In their survey, they found that of the folks who participated, 41% reported that they had attempted suicide. And then you can see that those statistics vary depending also on the experiences that they had connected to their transgender identity. So this slide starts to get the conversation started of maybe why. Why is this population at higher risk? So we're building awareness that they are, and then helping folks to understand maybe some of the reason for those higher statistics. Then we also talk about statistics we have about the environment. And again, if we're doing a module about higher education or K through 12 schools, we'll have slides that just talk about extensive statistics we have about those environments. But these statistics, which many of you have probably seen before, talk about family environment, that if youth experience severe familial rejection, that they're 8 times as likely to have attempted suicide. And that data comes from Caitlin Ryan and the Family Acceptance Project. We have some data from GLSEN that talks about school environment that helps us know that youth report that they are verbally abused at very high rates. LGBTQ youth are verbally abused at very high rates in school, and many are physically abused. And then data that also talks about the coming out process and how a lot of youth say that they lose friends when they come out and the impact that that potentially has upon mental health. So this section you can see right away, this is content that would be different from a traditional Gatekeeper education training because this really is helping them understand why this population is at higher risk for suicide. And then we also share a case study or a story from Ask Trevor. And Ask Trevor is our program where folks can write into us and then we respond to them. And with the understanding that statistics can sometimes really fail to explain and fully convey the reality of young people, we like to share at least one, sometimes 2 of these. And I'll go ahead and read this one for us, in fact. This young person writes, "Hi, I'm a 14-year-old girl and I'm bi. I told my sister, but she doesn't really seem to believe me, although she's completely okay with gay people. I think that she just thinks I'm confused. My parents are very anti-gay because they're very religious. I'm kind of planning to stay in the closet until I'm 18, and then I can move to a different state or something and never talk to my family again. I'm pretty sure that if I came out to my parents now, misspelling there, I would get kicked out, and I don't know where I would stay." So I think this very real story from this young person, and we, of course, responded to this letter from this young person, really can help people to understand those statistics that we just shared. And we really use this type of case study as an empathy building tool. At this point, if I were able to converse, if we were conversing together, we would have a conversation about what things you notice from this, what things stand out to you. And we always do that if we're in a room and training with folks. Things that people generally will notice about this is that this young person is fearful to come out to their parents, that they convey a bit of hopelessness. They convey that they feel that they're going to have to move to a different state when they come out and never talk to their family again. and they have fear about being homeless as a result of their bisexual identity. So those are several things that stand out. And already as folks who work in suicide prevention, we're already thinking risk factors, right? So we're looking at this and thinking, oh my goodness, look at all the various risk factors that might exist here for this young person. But it's a nice segue into having a conversation about risk factors and warning signs. So we know this population's at higher risk. Why is that? And what really are the risk factors? So we come at this point of our training with the belief or understanding that some people maybe have never had, as I said, a suicide prevention training. So we talk about what risk factors are and what protective factors are to frame that, and I won't take up your time with that information. We do talk about risk factors for suicide that are youth-specific. And so this would be something that any of you would do in a suicide prevention training. The way that it's a little different for us and that it's a little different in Trevor CARE is that we go through this list and then we help them to appreciate this could be any young person, could have one or a combination of these factors. But then we like to help them to appreciate that already from the start, queer youth are potentially at risk for several of these on the list. So if we're going to build kind of a profile of an imaginary person, already we know that LGBTQ youth are more likely to experience homelessness. In fact, we know that somewhere around 40% of the youth homeless population identifies as LGBTQ. So right away you could kind of put a check mark by that risk factor. We know that LGBTQ folks are more likely to experience the loss of a loved one, and that might be as you saw in that letter just before, not a loss because of death, but loss because of their LGBTQ identity. So you could kind of put a check mark by that one. We know that they're more likely to experience victimization, so you can put a check mark by victimization. And then because of those things, there are other things that they're more likely to be engaged in, including risky health behavior, non-suicidal self-injury, and a list of other things. So already you can see how an LGBTQ youth, because of sometimes the things they experience, obviously not all of the population, but many, many youth, experience many of these general risk factors for suicide. So that's the way how this content is different when we do this presentation, how we infuse that LGBT-specific content into this training. And then we like to have a conversation about, in addition to those risk factors, if we have our person that we're thinking about, maybe they have several of those risk factors, what other things are going on? What else is going on that might make them at higher risk for suicide? And I think that's the piece that's really, really important for people to walk out of this training understanding. I think if folks don't have any other understanding, that this is very important for them to walk away understanding. So I want to spend a moment just walking through this slide. From research, we can say that gender nonconformity or not conforming to societal norms around gender is one of the chief risk factors for the LGBTQ population. So gender nonconformity, and at this point in the training, we would have had an LGBT conversation, so there's some framework around this, but gender nonconforming would be someone who and I could give a few examples. For instance, if we're talking about a gay male, perhaps, who's gender nonconforming, perhaps it would be his gestures. And you all can't see me gesturing right now, but if you could, you would see that I'm very gender nonconforming in the way that I gesture. We have norms around body language. And many youth who are LGBT, their body language or other things may actually not conform to societal norms around gender. So body language is one example. Clothing, which would be gender expression, the way someone expresses themselves in their clothing, in their grooming, their hairstyle. Those things could all make them what we might call gender nonconforming. And those youth who are tagged as being more feminine if they're a boy, or more masculine if they're a girl, or in fact maybe transgender if they're a transgender person, would make them more susceptible to a variety of things, including victimization. which contributes to their risk for suicide. Another point is distress related to coming out. So coming out, someone sharing their LGBTQ identity is something that happens throughout their lifespan. It doesn't just happen once, and it has to happen to a lot of different people. So as we heard from that case study, it happens with family. It also happens with friends, and it may happen at school. When you're doing this training with professionals, you can say it may happen with you. They may come out, or they will need to come out to you if they're working with you, or may choose to come out to you. And from the research, we know that whether or not coming out goes well, it can be a very stressful life event. And for that reason, the risk for suicide is actually highest just prior to and just after coming out, because the potential anxiety and concern around whether it will go well or not, and then sometimes the difficulty that is experienced after coming out to folks if it doesn't go well, that distress related to that life event, especially in the case of a young person who may not have the coping skills to deal with such a significant event, places them at higher risk for suicide. So obviously a lot of complexity there. And then we separate that from rejection when coming out, because coming out goes well for a lot of people. So whether or not coming out goes, if coming out does not go poorly, the experience of coming out still is a stressor. But then some youth experience severe rejection when coming out. And we talked about the fact that can happen with family, and it can happen in all sorts of different communities. It can be subtle rejection, or it can be extreme rejection. But that rejection when coming out definitely is a reason why this population is at higher risk. The next category is unique developmental stressors, and that's really kind of a catch-all category. Another way to phrase this, and really maybe everything on this slide, would be minority stress, which is a term that many of you might be familiar with from other populations that you work with. So there are a lot of different examples that we can give to talk about minority stress. And it's really systematically and regularly being excluded rather than included because of institutional norms around sexual orientation and gender identity. So a really great example that I often offer to folks is, think about the first time that we start to offer an opportunity for young people to interact with each other, kind of in a dating type scenario. Many times it happens in middle school. We'll throw a middle school dance, right? Well, in most places, young people are expected to show up with someone of the opposite sex. And in fact, it would be a problem if they did not. For an LGBT young person, that may not be the right fit for them, might not be comfortable for them. And they might, in fact, having an awareness of their sexual orientation, might desire to go ahead and invite someone of the same sex. However, usually that would not be allowed, and there's not a space created for that. So that's an example of exclusion, of a system being built that does not include them, and that's stressful. And so that type of what is a seemingly small event, but those type of events over and over in setting after setting, from family to religious community to school to after-school activities, that could contribute to something we call minority stress, which places this population at higher risk for suicide. The last thing on the list is LGBTQ-related victimization. And so I've already shared some statistics with you about that. If we were talking, as I said, to a specific population, we would have shared more specific statistics. And so we all kind of know that that happens. The thing that I like to highlight as part of this slide is, and I think it's really important for all of us to walk away from this webinar understanding, is that that is only one reason of many, many reasons why LGBT people are at higher risk for suicide. That victimization, or what we might call bullying, is by no means the only reason. It's not a causal relationship. So bullying does not cause suicide. I believe that after the conversation around LGBTQ youth suicide really got kicked into high gear, so to speak, after the fall of 2010, there was a lot of misinformation on that topic, and a lot of people, well-meaning folks, would draw a connection and a parallel between bullying and suicide that was perhaps a little overzealous, and it's not exactly what the research conveys. So it's important to understand that victimization plays an important role, and most definitely it's something we should pay attention to, and it is a risk factor, but it's not the only risk factor. And so even if we did away with victimization, we would still have other things that we needed to address. This content in this slide, I will say, is very content heavy, even though there's only those 4 points. And so this usually is the area and the type of content that really folks spend a lot of time needing to ask questions about. And I'll say as we talk later in the webinar about how you can gain access to this curriculum and how you might think about or brainstorm about using this as part of what you do, that this is the type of content that really pairs well with other Gatekeeper education trainings, and it's really important for people to understand about LGBTQ youth, even if they don't understand other components of what we might discuss today. There's many implications for practice that come out of this slide. At this point, I like to lead folks in an activity, and we won't actually take the time to do this now. This is more to kind of demonstrate that I think when you're doing this type of training, and especially when you're talking about LGBTQ youth, it's really important to embed empathy building and awareness, both about what it feels like to be thinking about suicide, but also what it might feel like to be part of a group of people that is marginalized. Because that's such a significant part of the reason why this population is affected, to motivate people to change behavior, essentially, and change systems, which is part of what we're asking for if we're going to get our long-term effects. We have to have moments for that. And so this activity is built to provide that moment for people to take a break from the heavy content and brainstorm about what it would feel like to lose things in their own life. So I'll briefly describe the activity to you. We ask folks to write down 10 things on a piece of paper, number their paper from 1 to 10, and then they write down 10 things that are really important to their sense of well-being and happiness. It could be any 10 things. And I typically encourage people to be specific. And so people will typically write down things like my job, my brother, they might name a family member, they might name their faith community, things like that that are really core to their sense of well-being. And after everyone has written down 10 things, we ask folks to cross out the top 3, mark them off their list. And then we process together, what does that feel like to delete, essentially, 3 things from your list? And then we ask them to cross off the next 3. So they have crossed off 6 total. And then we talk again about what that feels like when they look at what they have left and they look at what they've lost. And then we ask them to cross off another 3, leaving just 1 left. And at this point, many folks are resistant. They don't want to participate even, as you can imagine, because you have a very visceral response to this type of activity. And we leave that 1 for a reason. We have folks leave 1 thing, which we'll talk about in a moment. And then we debrief together. We talk about what that activity felt like, and then what connection that might have to the way someone might be feeling if they're thinking about suicide. And so things that come up are feelings of hopelessness, feeling like you've lost everything, even if maybe you actually haven't, but feeling like you have, feeling that sense of hopelessness. And then I ask people what connection they think it might have specifically to LGBTQ youth. And the things that typically come up are that, unfortunately for this group of young people, there is a basis sometimes to have actual fear and concern that they will lose those things, as you saw evidenced in our Ask Trevor letter, where the young person felt she was going to lose her parents and lose her family. And that for many LGBTQ young people, unfortunately, they do experience, for instance, family rejection. And so for them, they might actually be crossing things off their actual list. And the last part of this activity, after we debrief together, is to describe that 1 thing left on the list. And we talk about how important just 1 person can be. That the statistics are a little gloomy, that they're very sobering, but one person can make a difference, and so that the rest of this presentation talks about how one person can make a difference and what they can actually do. And I think it's a good motivator to go to the next part of the presentation, which is how can you help? At this point, I'll say that part of what we do here is part of what all of you do as part of a Gatekeeper training. There's a lot of this is not very different than what you would do. How it is different is that we have conversations as we do group role plays, as we have conversations around how could this be different if it's an LGBTQ young person that's coming to you. Why might it be different from everything that we've just shared? How could it be different? Because sometimes it might be. So for instance, when we're talking about, the way you would respond, if the reason why they're at risk for suicide or they're thinking about suicide has to do with their LGBT identity and the way others are responding, would you share that information with their parents? Would you tell the school counselor that they're gay or lesbian or transgender? Or would you not? So we work through those types of questions together because the way you respond, those are important questions, and it can affect the outcome for the young person on the other end of them receiving help and treatment. So we talk about, excuse the formatting error there, but we talk about 3 key things of how to help: recognizing warning signs, responding in a way that will keep a young person safe, and then providing support that really does promote resiliency. So I just wanted to make you aware that that's what we do. I actually will kind of breeze through this. We talk about what the warning signs are. We walk through how to respond in a way that talks about it but also provides examples, which is very helpful. And we do a lot of this all of these slides are really group role play to walk through how you would actually respond. And we have people practice actually saying some of these things, asking the question, are you thinking about suicide out loud together as a group, which many people find very important. So that content, again, as we walk through it, we would make it contextual to this population. And then we talk about promoting resiliency. So kind of upstream, what can we do to prevent young people from getting there, specifically LGBT young people in the first place? And so we do talk about just resiliency in all youth and what the data shows and what the research shows. If we're talking to a more clinical audience, we might talk about this in a slightly more clinical way. And then we talk about specifically with LGBTQ youth, the things, some of which are the same as on the past slide, that are really important for resiliency and for them to be resilient. So the research is showing us that family connectedness is of key importance, that having caring adults, even just one caring adult, for instance in a school, can make all the difference. We do talk about school safety, and again, if they're in a school environment, we'll provide both recommendations around how to make schools safer as well as that data around what schools are like right now for queer youth. Social and support networks that are supportive of LGBTQ young people. So we spend time brainstorming around what would that look like in your community? What resources are there? So if you're someone who's working with queer young people and you're thinking, I want to prevent them from attempting suicide, and I know they have all these risk factors, so I'm aware of that now, but then I also need to do stuff to essentially counterbalance that, and that's what protective factors do. That's what all of this is protective factors, and protective factors can essentially counterbalance those additional risk factors. So what things am I going to put on the other end of that scale? And some of those things are support networks. So what types of support networks are there? In a school environment, is there a gay-straight alliance, which is essentially a club for gay young people? If there's not that, is there a support group in the community? Many communities, especially rural communities, there are starting to be youth groups for LGBTQ young people outside of the schools, because maybe the schools aren't the right place in that location to have a support network for a variety of reasons. So maybe there's a youth group that's meeting outside of school hours. If there isn't that sort of network, what's online? What is there on the internet? And one of the programs that the Trevor Project provides, which I'll tell you more about later, is called Trevor Space, which is an online social networking service. It has over 70,000 young people, many of whom live in parts of the country where there's very little in the way of connectivity in their community, but they're able to find community online. And then the other protective factor we talk about is coping mechanisms in general. So for this population, that it's especially important to provide strategies for self-care, strategies for them to take care of themselves, to alleviate stress, to cope with stressful events and anxiety, and that they have essentially a toolbox full of strategies for support, strategies for coping when they are going through hard times, perhaps related to their LGBT identity. So I think this would be a secondary part when we talk about thinking about suicide prevention education and making sure that people are capable of doing suicide prevention, having suicide prevention conversations in a way that applies to LGBTQ youth. This is another area of content that's really important, that people walk away understanding both why they're at higher risk and then what can we do in the way of protective factors that counterbalances that risk. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to say that something else that we talk about is the connection to bullying, because it is so complex, and it's the thing that usually comes up the most about LGBTQ youth. And it probably is the question that many of you might hear if you're going to talk about LGBTQ youth and their suicide risk is, well, if we decrease bullying, will that solve the problem? And so we talk about what does the research actually say about bullying, and how should we frame the conversation around bullying? So this gives some recommendations. One thing that I think is very interesting, which is not on this slide, is that the most current research actually tells us that that it's not as black. It's not a black and white world in the sense of who's at risk for suicide when it comes to bullying. That many youth both engage in bullying behavior and themselves are bullied. And there's a research study that calls that person the victim bully. They're involved in both sides of the equation. And in fact, they're at the highest risk for suicide, at higher risk than just youth who are themselves bullied. So I think it's really important for people to walk away understanding that when it comes to LGBTQ youth, that some of them may in fact be in that situation themselves. The Trevor Project stance is that we're here for all young people. Regardless of what's going on in their life, we're here to listen to them. And so maybe they're engaged in cyberbullying. Maybe they're also being bullied at school. We're here to talk with them in a way that's non-judgmental about whatever experience they're having. So after providing all of that content, we talk about our services. And this is really the last part of the presentation, and we'll go through this so that we have time to talk about how you actually use all of this. One thing I should have said in the beginning, which I'm not saying now, is obviously, you know, you're just receiving an overview. This training overall usually takes about 3 hours. So this is a substantive training, 2.5 to 3 hours minimum, and then if you're going to add these other modules, this really would be potentially a day-long type of event, especially with role plays. So just to provide some framework around how all of this content rolls into a training. So what does the Trevor Project provide? Some of you may know this already, but I want to make sure that those on the line who have not heard this receive this information. One of the things that the Trevor Project provides, really our first service, was the Trevor Lifeline. So we provide a 24/7 crisis intervention and suicide prevention lifeline that's specifically for LGBTQ youth, and you see the number there on the screen in front of you. We are accredited through AAS as a suicide prevention lifeline, and I can't overestimate the importance of the fact that this resource exists for LGBTQ youth. It's unique in a lot of ways. It's youth-specific. So all of our folks who are working on our line are really trained specifically to work with youth, and that's who they work with, which there's something unique about that, the way they talk to young people, especially as regards to suicide. And all of them are extremely competent in working with LGBTQ issues and LGBTQ youth. We have a lot of youth call our lifeline that we don't know their sexual orientation or their gender identity. But the fact that youth know when they call our line that the person on the other end of a line will be competent on that issue. It removes a barrier to help seeking. Because for LGBTQ young people, having to ask the question, is this resource, is this person going to be supportive or not, is very stressful. And many times it might prevent them from reaching out for help at all. So the fact that this line is dedicated to them removes that help-seeking barrier for a lot of young people. We recognize as well that a lot of young people are not talking on the phone anymore. So with that understanding, we also opened up Trevor Chat with the desire to remove the barrier for help seeking for young people who want to chat online, and we have that's a very robust service now. We answer many chat interactions as well, and of course that's a direction that many crisis centers are going in. We also started Trevor Text, which also, again, other crisis centers are starting text lines, and with the recognition that young people like to text on their phone. And as I often joke, when somebody calls me on my cell phone, I frequently don't answer, and then I text them back, hey, what's up? And so for a lot of young people, that's the case, and they are more comfortable texting. So those are our crisis services that we offer to youth, and we put this here because all of these really are a protective factor for them, the fact that these exist. And so it's important that they know that they're there. And I think the other thing I would add is that a lot of people, when we talk about providing resources for LGBTQ youth, there are fears and concerns around that. And one may be, am I going to do it wrong? I don't know everything about transgender youth. I don't know everything about what it means to be gay or lesbian or bisexual. So does that mean I can't provide support at all? Well, the answer most definitely is no. You can provide support, even if you don't completely understand this population. So that's important to know. But it's also important to know that there's people that have your back, that you don't have to be the be-all, end-all resource. And so when we think about removing barriers for adults to offer help, one of them would be giving them resources so that they feel like they have somewhere to direct youth to. And our lines and our crisis services would be one of the places, not the only place, but one of the places they can direct youth to. We also provide things which are community building and more on the prevention side. Trevor Space, which I told you about, is that social network, which is absolutely amazing. A safe space for youth actually to interact from across the globe, not just within the United States. So all across the world, youth are able to interact on this site. We make sure we monitor it to keep it very safe for young people. And it's really fascinating to see many times young people will, for instance, post things like about coming out to their families, that they're having a hard time. And then you're going to see 10, 20 young people respond back with suggestions. And many times it's right on the money, so to speak. It's really effective and competent advice that they're offering each other. So it's really a fantastic way for them to support each other and definitely a protective mechanism for folks who don't have a lot of support. And then there is Ask Trevor, which I've already described. You see an example of the letter. You can actually go online and look at the letters and the responses that we offer, which is a great tool, I think, for people who are thinking about wanting to understand good ways to respond to these types of issues. That's all public. It's kind of like a Dear Abby online, but for LGBTQ young people. So in addition to those resources, we offer a robust set of education programs. So this is an example of one of them, what we're talking about today. I said in the beginning that we do also education programs with youth, and so I think, and I can't stress enough how important it is, and this is, for many of you already know this, but there are some people who I've been surprised are not having this conversation, that suicide prevention with youth is very different than doing it for a room full of adults. For instance, all the data I shared with you today about the fact that LGBTQ youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. We wouldn't walk into a room full of LGBTQ young people and say, so we're here to talk to you because you're 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. That sounds shocking. I say that because I've heard people have done that. So while it sounds like an extreme, it's really important to know that there are ways to do this and ways not to do this, right, when you're working directly with this population. So the Lifeguard Workshop is the Trevor Project's curriculum that is a suicide prevention training for LGBTQ young people and for just groups of youth in general as well. So there's 2 separate types of lesson plans. It is listed in the Best Practice Registry for suicide prevention. We recently released this curriculum as a video-based curriculum. So you can go online, you can request this resource, and you'll receive materials to conduct the training, as well as either a DVD or you can access the video files online, along with corresponding lesson plans. So that curriculum is now available nationwide. Trevor Resource Kits is part of what you would get if you requested the Lifeguard Workshop, which is a kit full of materials. So any of you after this call can request a resource kit, and it has things to put up in your environment, stickers, other things to show that you're supportive of and for LGBTQ young people. And it also has curriculum, for instance, for the Top 10 Things activity that is in this, that's part of this curriculum. It's mainly resources for people who work directly with youth. And then we have the 2 adult trainings, which I won't describe again because I've described them for you already. Both of these trainings are ones that we're doing nationwide. In addition to that, we have online trainings. And it looks like, again, I have a little font mess up there on the top, so excuse that. But we have online trainings as well in collaboration with Cognito Interactive. And many of you no doubt know who Cognito Interactive is, may even perhaps have partnered with them in another capacity. I think it's really exciting that they recognize the need for and created 3 LGBTQ-specific modules. They're really fantastic. As any of you who have interacted with their online programs before know, they're really fantastic, high-quality programs. They have data that really shows that they're really highly effective. So there's Step and Speak Up, which is for middle school and high school folks. And then there are 2 for college campuses, one that's focused for faculty and staff, and one that is focused for students, which is really fantastic. You can access these as individuals through the Trevor Project's website, or, of course, if you are an institution or a state, so if you have a grant, for instance, you can think about having this as part of your grant and making this available to folks. The benefit to this, and the way it kind of dovetails with what Trevor Project does already, this provides practice for folks. So there is definitely teaching components too, which is kind of what you see visualized there in the image on the screen. There are parts of the interactive where you learn, and then parts where you get to practice what you learn. It's a really great pairing for folks to go to an in-person training and then be given access to this tool as a follow-up for practice. I think that it pairs nicely when you do it that way. Some folks, I think it's important to acknowledge, are not going to come to a training just on LGBTQ young people. They may have personal barriers. In some areas of the country, folks might be nervous to come into a room and be seen in a room having this conversation, and that's okay. But we still need them to be competent in working with LGBTQ young people, and so they can do this at the privacy of their own home, behind you at their own computer screen. They can make mistakes. They can ask, questions that might be termed silly questions, and make mistakes and see what happens when they make mistakes. So it's a safe way for folks to learn on this topic, which I think is really exciting. If you want more information about these, please don't hesitate to reach out to me after the webinar. In addition to that, the Trevor Project also has created 2 really great campaigns, awareness campaigns. And so another thing I'll say, I know when I went to the Garrett Lee Smith grantee meeting this last year, which I always love to do and see all the creative things that folks are doing, is that a lot of you do work on LGBTQ specific efforts, and a lot of you put a lot of time and energy to create your own campaigns, which is fantastic. If you want to either decrease the cost of that or maybe not have to create your own campaign, there are campaigns we've created, which are awesome. And the cool thing about them are that they're always going to connect youth back to our crisis services too. So that's a good connection that bridges there. So one is called Talk to Me. Definitely, as you see there on the slide, kind of macro level prevention goals, which is fantastic. And there are a host of resources that come with that, as you kind of see there in the images. We also just launched Ask for Help, which is our PSA campaign. So there's a video-based version of that, which is airing as a commercial across the country. There's a radio component to this. There are posters. There are other tools. So if you're interested in using this, we're more than happy to collaborate with you and provide these resources for you also. So I end the training with this statistic, which is that, or this comment, which is one supportive adult in an environment can decrease LGBTQ youth risk for suicide. Just one person can decrease that risk. for suicide. And so, as we said, we asked that question, what can one person do? And one person really can do a lot. And this is what the Trevor Project is working towards, which is a future where the possibilities, the opportunities, and the dreams are the same for all young people, regardless of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. So we end the training on that kind of high note, that that's our long-term, I think that's a public health goal, really, in many ways, and that's our long-term goal as an organization. So that really kind of wraps up what the training would look like. And again, you've received the crash course version, and I hope that as we're having this conversation that you've been asking in your mind, okay, how can I take maybe parts of that and use it with what I already do, or how can I use that training in its entirety? Hopefully you're asking those questions, because that's what we're going to talk about now. So I would like to actually turn things back over to Morgan. So Morgan can describe a little bit about how he's been using this on the ground in Missouri, and we can talk about that a little bit. Morgan?
Thanks, Nathan. This has been great. I am in the state of Missouri. I'm working on the eastern side, actually, towards St. Louis, and I've been working with LGBT young people for the past 5 years. But in the last year and a half, I've been working with the Garrett Lee Smith Grant and the Missouri Suicide Prevention Project with Scott Perkins to implement the programs of Ally, CARE, and the full curriculum that sort of Nathan has been talking about. And I've been doing that through colleges, other high schools, middle schools, school nurses associations, conferences, suicide prevention conferences, basically anyone that will let me in the door to talk about LGBT young people and suicide. I've also been doing a lot of partnering with some of the other folks around the state that are already doing work on suicide and trying to, get them to use some of this best practices, some of the best practices that we have known in our program, in their program, so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel, as Nathan was sort of talking about. In a state like Missouri, there's very little, if at all, programs that do have best practices in them or have had best practices in them. And so I know that it's really important, as I sort of did this work, to sort of like work with those things in mind. And so we've seen a lot of progress, but I would have to say that the majority of our work has been specifically around competency, and that the Ally training that we did last week was really great, because it leads us into a further conversation that we can get into with CARE, which we sort of went over today. And I would say that the majority of our state specifically, are the things that have been the most requested, are just that baseline understanding. And that's one of the things I kind of learned. I thought, oh yeah, like we're going to be able to go in and have huge conversations, and I found out that we were really having conversations about what does it mean to come out. And so it's also been interesting, because I've also come across some of the pitfalls that Nathan was talking about earlier with, some of the folks that I work here in the state with sort of wanting to do trainings like you would do as an adult or a practitioner, and wanting to do those same types of trainings with LGBT young people or just young people in general. And so sort of separating out the audiences, I've learned about sort of the major pitfalls, but on top of that, I've learned a lot about sort of what does it take to really take this curriculum and infuse it into someone who's already doing this work on suicide prevention, and sort of training them. And so that's what our next steps are looking like. We're really trying to gear up for sort of training folks in our state that can be trainers of this. So I've been doing it for the past year and a half, and then we also have somebody on the western side of the state, Beth, to do this as well. But we really want to not only, do this ourselves, but also train a whole bunch of other folks who can then go out and do this training. So that's what we're looking at next steps, and where our work is headed, to make sure that we're not the only ones here in the state that are competent and that can train on LGBT young people on suicide. We have a lot of folks that, like Nathan was talking about, have really great intentions and, do some some stellar Google research, but sometimes it's not always based in actual evaluation. So I've been doing this for the last year, like and a half, like I said, and so if anyone has any questions or whatever, I'd be more than welcome to answer them whenever the question and answer time comes up. So thanks so much for having me, and keep up the good work across the United States.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Morgan. One thing I can say is that, the reason why the Trevor Project, partially why we decided to collaborate with Missouri in the way we did, is that we noticed we had a very high call volume on our lifelines from the state of Missouri. And so something that told us was that youth were reaching out to us there at higher rates because maybe they didn't have support in their own communities. So we recognized that meant we needed to do more upstream prevention work there on the ground, which has been really successful. And I think, one of the things we talked about is kind of the fear or the apprehension of, can I have this conversation? Can I talk about this where I am? And, something I want to share about Missouri, and Morgan, if you have anything to share on this, please feel free to jump in, is, I've done trainings there too across the last several years. And, I have been in spaces where, folks expressed that it was a stretch for them to be in the room to have that conversation, or that they, none of their colleagues knew they were there to learn about LGBTQ youth because of maybe the town they live in or their work environment. This conversation is one that's a little more difficult to have. And so I think it's important to know that LGBTQ young people are everywhere, even in very small and rural locations, that this isn't a conversation that's just being had, that this type of work is not just being done in New York and San Francisco and LA, but we really are having these conversations and doing this type of work very successfully in places like Missouri. Morgan, is there anything you wanted to add about that?
I would just concur that there have definitely been times that I've either been in trainings where folks have explicitly told me, that the rest of their staff or their coworkers don't know. And then I've also sort of even experienced sort of, the shock of, the idea that we talk about this so openly, which is so interesting to me, right? Because I think that that's really where we're breaking open some light and sort of shedding some light on some things, but it's just not talked about very professionally in a way that sort of lets that light be open in our state very often. So I'm really excited about what's been happening. More and more folks have been coming to our trainings, and we've been seeing more folks tap into the work. So
awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So now that you've kind of heard how that is successfully working on the ground, I want to briefly convey to you some things that we have coming up as, again, your wheels are hopefully turning about how you can use all this content. This winter, in February, we will be launching a Train the Trainer program with this curriculum that you just saw, including all the modules that you saw. And so part of that will be a certified trainer network. As you see there on the slide, it will be 2 days worth of training for folks to come in and learn how to use these different curriculum that we use, including Trevor Ally, Trevor CARE, the Lifeguard Workshop for Youth, and our campaigns. And then you'll be welcomed into this certified trainer network, which is really kind of what Morgan is. He's a regional coordinator for us and in a way is a certified trainer. And so we're going to really expand that to open that up to folks nationwide so they can use this curriculum. Much in the same way that other curriculum have a certified trainers system. Part of that will be, if you think about especially this curriculum, maybe you're doing any other suicide prevention curriculum, be it ASSIST or QPR, any number of others. And I know that from what I'm hearing from folks on the ground, what they've just been doing is, because they need to talk about LGBTQ youth, is they've been creating a few slides and putting it into their presentation, whatever it may be. I know obviously there's a lot of questions around that. I'm not necessarily encouraging you to do that. I know that many trainings, they require that you go through a system to approve any changes, which is good because that affects the quality of the program. So it's really important that we do that. That being said, any adaptations that you do make, you want to make sure that the adaptations are things that are themselves also valid. And so part of what we'll be doing is offering a module of CARE, of this training specifically, if you want to add on information about LGBTQ youth and their risk for suicide specifically, and explain their risk as well as their protective factors and what we should do about it. then we'll be offering that as a module that folks maybe want to attach onto any other type of training. It could be a suicide prevention training or another type of health training that you're doing. So we're really excited that we'll be offering that in the spring, and I know there's been some questions, and I'll just state now that there will be a kind of a cost incurred. The cost will cover our cost as a nonprofit to have a staff person attend to come to actually do this training with you, with however many people you gather to become certified trainers. And so part of what we'll be providing is ideas around both how to get folks that you want to do this, how to have other folks involved so that there's a small group for us to train at one time, and then also ideas around what the cost would look like and ideas around funding for that. The cost will be minimal. It will be mainly to provide for the cost that we incur in actually conducting the training. So with that, I'd actually like to turn it over now for questions and answers. We have a good almost 15 minutes. So if there are questions from you all, we would love to have a conversation.
Thank you. We'll now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name. To withdraw your request, it's *2. It'll be just one moment for any questions on the phone. Again, *1 and record your name. It'll be just a moment, please. Yes. Our first question will come from Andrea.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Andrea.
I have a question. I'm going to remain anonymous as far as the college that I work at, but my question is, according to the research that I'm aware of, it's important for people that identify as LGBT in counseling type settings to disclose that when it seems right to people that are also coming in to see them, with the idea in mind, whether you're that one person that we were learning about or just so they know that it's the society, not them. And that's not always something that is encouraged here. And I'm trying to kind of build up information so I don't have to do it behind my boss's back.
Right. So if I understand your question correctly, it's about creating a space for them to come out when they're comfortable coming out. Is that the question?
No, it's creating a space for me to come out as a being LGBT community, so they know, hey, there's somebody that I'm talking to that gets it.
Okay, right. Yeah, so I think, that's a great issue that you raise when we talk about environments where we're actually trying to provide support, for LGBTQ youth, that the staff members who are providing the support need to feel comfortable being out as a supporter. And so what I hear you talking about specifically as it relates to college campuses is kind of campus climate about LGBTQ issues. And what is the campus climate like?
Right.
And sorry, did you have another question?
In campus climate about boundary issues and how, based on the research, and whenever I have chose to disclose that, it's always worked out quite well. And people I've seen the relief come across their face. I don't want to be discouraged or, told not to do that, and I'm trying to think how I can encourage that within the community I'm working in.
Right. So disclose your own identity to those that you're working with. Okay, yes. So, I hear what you're saying. So definitely part of that is a workplace issue, right? Do you feel comfortable? And then, is it good or not good is what I hear you asking, to disclose that to the person that you're working with. And, I would say that most definitely what we do know is that it's really important for young people to feel, or for any person to feel, that they can trust someone they're asking for help from. And if you know that that person is also part of the community, that's very helpful. And so the suggestion I would offer, which I offer to many people, if you're finding it that it's a difficult environment and that there's negative feedback about verbalizing things, is there's a lot of ways to offer cues that are nonverbal.
Okay.
Be it subtle things in your office, things that maybe folks who are not LGBT wouldn't even notice, right? A sticker maybe that would have, that's a symbol, and we have a lot of various symbols, right, that are things that somebody who's LGBT goes, this person might be part of the LGBT community. Other things of that sort, resources, like brochures from the Trevor Project, for instance. Someone who's not LGBT might not know what those are, right. But if you are LGBT, you're going to go, and that might open up a conversation so that it may not be you having to instigate that, but that being brought to you by the person you're working with.
Okay.
And I really think from personal experience and from what I hear from others, those subtle environmental cues are actually of extreme importance for LGBT people, and that might actually help you in your scenario as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Our next question comes from David.
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering about, I work at a college counseling center, and when I talk to my clients, you know, if I'm recommending to them the resource of the hotline, kind of what would I tell them about what to expect if they call in? And also, I'm wondering, is the hotline, is it anonymous and confidential or only confidential?
So that's a great question. It's a confidential lifeline is the word that we use to describe it. We're not going to make public someone's identity, obviously. I mean, there's people only choose to share some things with us, right? So some folks may not even share their name. They definitely may not share their sexual orientation. We're not going to ask their sexual orientation or their gender identity. That's not a question that we ask. Our approach, really, so to answer your question of what can they expect when they call, is that we're just there to listen and to have the conversation that they want to have. So they can expect someone who is very warm and very supportive on the other end of the line to really have a conversation and take it where they want to and need to take it. Now, it is a suicide prevention line, so that being said, we will ask some questions about, you know, if they're thinking about suicide. That's something that will happen during the course of the call. But many of the folks who call our line are not thinking about suicide, and they just need to have a conversation with someone. And so we're there 24/7 for that, to have a conversation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. And so does the hotline, like, connect with or, like, take action to intervene, or would it more, like, connect people who are suicidal with calling 911 or going to a hospital or something like that?
Right. That's a really great question. We don't really talk about kind of the details, especially with young people, of what happens if, in fact, someone is at risk for suicide. We don't talk about a lot of those kind of procedures, like most national lifelines kind of wouldn't delve into a lot of those details. What I can say is that that we help people to make decisions and empower them to make decisions about what's going to work best for them to keep themselves safe. So the Trevor Project overall, because I think this is really important, especially when you're working with young people, is that they feel like they have control and they feel like they're empowered to make decisions for themselves. So we really do help folks to work through what's the best decision for them. If they are thinking about suicide, what's the best decision for them to get help? And with us being a suicide prevention line, we are qualified and able to take action if necessary to make sure that young people stay safe.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, David.
Our next question will come from Miriam.
Hi, yes, this is Miriam. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Miriam.
Okay, sorry, because I was in, I don't know, the phone. Okay, so I think, you know, Melanie, who sponsors usually the training that we have in the New York State, so she would like us to be trained next year, take those T4T trainings. But I'm wondering if you have any of those trainings already going on in the state, well, if possible in New York City. So I think it would be important for us to take those trainings before taking the T4T. And if you have any schedule of trainings going on, that would be great if you can share with us so we can attend those.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for asking that question. One of our offices is actually based in New York. I'm based in New York. And so we do, in fact, where we do coordinate with the grants, the Garrett Lee Smith grant in the state. And we do, in fact, offer trainings in the city regularly. So what you would want to do is go to our website, and there is a request form that you can fill out for Trevor CARE Training. So if you fill that form out, then one of our staff members will be in touch with you. They'll reach out to you after you fill out that form. So that's on our website under the resources section and adult trainings, and then you'll see the request form for Trevor CARE and Ally.
Oh, great, thank you. Yeah, I took already the Trevor CARE, but the Ally I haven't, so I will be more interested in that one. But thank you so much. Yeah, I will.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks for that question.
Our next question will come from Denise.
Hi.
Hi, Denise.
We were wondering, and you might have indicated this, but we missed it. For the statistics that you shared, like the risk for suicide being 4 times more likely with LGBT youth, and also the statistic of having a supportive adult can decrease the suicide risk by 30%. We were just wondering where that's from.
Right. So the first about the 4 times more likely, and it's 3 to 4 times more likely, comes from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Specifically from a survey that was done in the state of Massachusetts. There's been other surveys since then that also have provided some data, but that specific statistic is taken from there. And the other statistic about one supportive adult decreasing the risk for suicide is taken from a study, and my apologies, it was not cited at the end of that slide, from, I believe, 2003, and it's a research article, and I can forward that to you as a citation if you're interested in having it. If you want to email me, my email is going to come up here in just a moment, and I'd be happy to email that citation to you.
Okay, thanks.
My pleasure.
And at this time, I'm showing no other questions.
Okay, I'm actually going to put my email up here, so that's how you can get in touch with me. And also, as Morgan indicated, if you have questions for Morgan, if you're wondering about how things have been going on the ground with this type of work in Missouri, please feel free to reach out to Morgan as well. And Melanie, I will turn it back over to you. Okay, do we all have any other questions? So, Michelle?
Well, I want to thank everybody for being on this webinar, and I want to thank our speakers, our presenters, Nathan and Morgan. Thank you so much for all of this really valuable information. I think it really segues nicely from the webinar that we did last week. And for those of you who were on the webinar last time, the webinar that we did last week will be posted on the sprc.org website, as will this one. It does take some time for that to occur, so check back maybe next week for the first one and then the following week for this one. They will be posted eventually, so if you want to listen to them again or if you want to share them with a colleague who is unable to make it, you'll be able to do that. So thank you so much for joining us today, and be sure to check back with the sprc.org website for more information on these webinars and also more information on suicide prevention, as well as the trevorproject.org website. So thanks, everybody, and have a great holiday.
Thank you. This will conclude today's call. You may go ahead and disconnect.